Welcome to the DFS Build NBA edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, ready to go over the Showdown Slate for Wednesday, May 22nd, with the Mavs and the Timberwolves facing off in Minnesota. Game one should be interesting. I did a two-game breakdown yesterday, so if you watched that, you should have some idea as to how I feel about some of these plays, but obviously it's a little bit different if we're shifting just to a showdown mentality. I'm not doing a two-game slate because I learned my lesson the hard way that last time I went in, the projections just were not ready that early in the day for the second game. So I don't know how beneficial that is, the more I think about it, to do a two-game breakdown if there's only like projections and ownership and all that for one game. So I think we're just going to do showdown slates unless I end up doing some of these two-game videos like later in the day when I have time. But either way, if you're doing two-game slates, like if you're going to do the Wednesday, Thursday right now, or Wednesday, whatever it is, Wednesday, Friday, I can't remember what the actual days are, you can still use the showdown insight that I offer, because I'm actually going to do a little bit differently than what I've been doing. I'm going to look over all the plays and then kind of provide any insight as far as whether I would want to use them in utility specifically or also in captain. So, obviously, this is not an easy matchup for the Mavs. They're on the road. The Timberwolves are a good defensive team. This game could be a bit slower than Dallas is accustomed to. So across the board, not really inviting for DFS, but it's what we're working with, right? So it's all relative to the slate. Everybody's dealing with the same problem, and it's one game, so I'm not that worried about that. It is what it is. So right off the top, Luka Doncic is obviously an amazing play. He's going to have the best projections, coming in with a 57-point fantasy projection. If we look over at his captain projection, he's blowing everybody away by 31 points or 29 points. But still, that's considerable. And yeah, he just has the highest ceiling, highest floor. He's just the best play across the board for sure. Obviously, specifically on the Mavs. Let me actually pull up real quick the DraftKings stuff. Not fully prepared, obviously, but he's been doing well. He has not exhibited that like classic Luka ceiling that we like to see, but I don't think it's really wise to just assume that won't return in the playoffs. I mean, he's still been really, really good. He's top 60 fantasy points, 4 or 5 different times in the playoffs. He's pretty much a lock for 50 plus fantasy points, assuming a game doesn't lead to a blowout. So he's the best play on the board. I don't have any interest in fading him. Obviously, you're going to have a more appealing build if you don't play Luka, because he's so expensive. But he's definitely going to be a candidate for the captain slot. The only issue with Luka in the captain is that he might end up being chalky there. And obviously at 19.8K in the captain slot, that is going to be a little bit of a hindrance on your build. So my strategy going in right away is definitely to roster Luka, probably close to or literally 100%. But a lot of that is going to be in the utility, and I'm going to try to get different right away and get other guys who have ceilings in the captain slot for sure. But I don't see a world where you're going to win. You get a takedown with Luka not being in your lineup. So that's just what I'm going to do for this slate. Kyrie Irving, though, is pretty interesting to me. He has not been good lately. He has less than 29, or he has 29 or fewer fantasy points in each of his last 3 games. He's not exhibited much of a ceiling lately, but he did have 2 50-plus fantasy point outings against the Clippers. So perhaps he starts finding a shot a bit more and gets a little bit more aggressive now that they're a series away from the NBA Finals. I don't know, but I would actually bet on that happening at some point. Will it happen in game 1? I don't know. Obviously, Mike Conley is a very tough draw. Not fun to face Mike Conley for sure. But these guys are studs. They're superstars. They are technically matchup proof if they're feeling it. So Kyrie Irving is coming at 40% ownership overall, which makes him not contrarian, obviously, but for a showdown slate, that's not that owned. And he's going to be obviously way less owned in the captain slot. So I don't think Irving is a must in utility at all. He's not a must across the board based off of who he's been lately. but we do know he has the ceiling. And if he's not going to be owned in the captain slot, he's very, very interesting to me there. Obviously, you would have to have some kind of feeling that Dallas is going to be competitive in this game, and maybe even Dallas ends up winning this game because obviously Kyrie Irving finding a high level of success would suggest that. But yeah, he looks really, really interesting at captain, and he's a totally fine play at utility, but not a must by any means. PJ Washington had been doing really well, came back down to earth a little bit. Not super interested in like cramming him into my lineup at 8.4K. I mean, PJ Washington over an 8K Rudy Gobert. No, I'm going to go Rudy Gobert every time there. Pay 800 more to go get Cat. That feels like an easy call too. So the only thing to note there is that he has exhibited a ceiling. He has two like massive games in the previous series. One massive game with 58 fantasy points and two other 40-point fantasy games. So he's getting really big minutes. He has exhibited a high scoring ceiling, and he's also, capable of getting rebounds and stuff. So PJ Washington is a fine play. I'm not looking to cram him in, but I do think I would like to be overweight on the field because right now he's coming at 17% owned overall. That's really low, obviously. If that holds, he's going to be a really interesting utility play and even perhaps an appealing captain play. And we know he has an okay floor, and we know what the ceiling can look like. So that's why I do like him a little bit at captain if he's going to be that overlooked. Derek Lively, Derek Jones, Daniel Gafford, they're all kind of the same play. Derek Jones is safer because he's going to get minutes. Derek Jones has been pretty decent in the playoffs so far. Let's see. He's the cheapest of that trio. He had 35 fantasy points in his last game in 40 minutes. He has 27 plus fantasy points in each of his last 3 games. So the minutes and production has been there. He's not exactly the safest guy to trust, but he's going to be the cheapest option of that trio, and he's going to get the most minutes. So I think his floor is the most appealing of that trio. And the ceiling goes to Gafford if the efficiency can return. The thing is, Gafford and Lively are both going to be needed with Cat and Rudy there down low, but it's really tough to bank on them being like really efficient in this matchup. The only game Gafford went up against Minnesota, he had 21 fantasy points, so not amazing. And 2 games, Lively had 18 fantasy points per game. So they're going to continue to split the center minutes, and the Mavs are just going to ride the hot hand, whoever's playing the best out there and getting it done. So pick your poison. I think as far as utility goes, 5.2K and 5.4K, they're totally fine plays, and you absolutely should consider them. I don't really love them for captain just because the ceilings aren't amazing and the floors can be pretty low. And also the matchup is obviously not amazing. So I think DJJ, Gafford, and Lively are all really good utility plays. Not really guys I'm racing to go slide into my captain slot tonight. But I will remind you, if you're playing a ton of lineups, as always, Showdown Slates across all sports, you literally can play anybody. So it's up to you to make that call. I'm just looking at it from a logical perspective, like who's really likely to pop off or who's a safe play, who has a ceiling. And right now, the captains for the Mavs, for the most part, I'd be looking at Luka, Kyrie, and PJ. They're the most appealing to me. It does not mean you can't play Gafford or Lively or even Derek Jones Jr. Because freaking Jaden McDaniels was the captain in a takedown first place lineup a couple days ago. So, yeah, let that sink in. I mean, anything can happen, truly. Speaking of which, Drew Holiday, fuck off. Are you kidding? I like look at it from like a usage and ceiling perspective, and Drew Holiday just goes and absolutely nukes the slate. My only lineup that did anything yesterday, of course, had Drew Holiday in the captain slot. Absolutely ridiculous. But that is what can happen. NBA can be a high variance sport at times. So yeah, you can play anybody in captain. The other guys we can look at are Tim Hardaway Jr. at 3K flat, 6 minutes in the last game. That's not very encouraging. Josh Green has been playing 15 to 20 minutes about lately. So he is definitely the guy I would prefer of the two. Tim Hardaway Jr. can always get going as a scorer. So if nobody's going to be on him, and it looks kind of to be the case with 14% ownership, he's still playable in a showdown slate just because he's going to get a few minutes, and he's really cheap. Josh Green has a lower ceiling in general, but he's the better play because his minutes are more established. Let's see here. Jaden Hardy is picking up ownership here at 34%. That's interesting since he's not really involved that much in the series. He has 15 and 11 minutes in the last 2 games in the playoffs. So if that starts ticking up, or if you feel like that's a trend that's going to continue at 2K flat, yeah, you can consider Jaden Hardy. I don't have a lot of faith in him. He's pretty scoring dependent, and just he's burned me so many times. So I hope I don't eat crow there, and Hardy just goes nuclear. But I feel like if he's going to be mega chalk, I would much rather just go to Josh Green. I feel like he's a bit more stable. All right, so over to the Minnesota side we go. They actually have quite a few guys that would entertain for the captain slot. Fucking Jaden McDaniels, I guess. I mean, so stupid. Obviously, Anthony Edwards is a pretty good pivot off of Luka in the captain slot. I can't tell you what the captain ownership is going to be right now. But if Luka is going to be 25% owned, I'm assuming Edwards will be anywhere between 15 and 20% owned. So he's going to still be pretty chalky as the captain. The reality is people want the guys with the highest ceiling in the captain because you get that 1.5 times points. And then if the rest of your lineup shakes out, that's going to work out pretty well for you. The only issue is then you're going to get a lot of duped lineups if you're stuck there with one of those 2 guys who are really high on captains and the rest of your lineups all look the same. So if we can get different at captain and match that production or find those points somewhere else in our lineup, that is something we want to do. So Edwards gives us a little bit of leverage off of Luka in the captain slot, and he's a little bit cheaper. Not exactly super cheap. He's 17K, so you're saving 2K here. So that's a fine try. I have no problem with that. If I would still play Luka in the utility slot, it's just you get pretty thin here. If we're mapping out this lineup here and we put Edwards and Luka in, you're then dealing suddenly with 4 more slots with 4.9K per player. If you want to go eat that Jaden Hardy chalk, you can go down and get Jaden Hardy, and then that jumps up to 5.9K per slot. Let's see a realistic guy to go pair with him. Naz Reid off the bench. He looks really good. Also, you're going 6.6 per slot, and we go get freaking Jaden McDaniels. And then you can come up and get Mike Conley, or you can drop down and get Derek Jones Jr., who I like, and go up and get Rudy Gobert. So it's still viable. And that's just one example of how you could build that out. And obviously, if you put it into a lineup optimizer like DFS Hero, which, by the way, if you hit our link below, you can get 15% off right now. If you do that, it'll do a lot of the work for you. And then you can either just use the lineups they pump out, you can send it to their sims, or you can take the lineups and then tweak them as you see fit. The point is you can create good lineups with Luka and Anthony Edwards at the captain slot. So I don't have a problem with it at all because they have really nice ceilings and are by far the top 2 plays of the slate. But can we get a little bit different and still include 1 or 2 of those guys and give ourselves a chance to really separate ourselves from the field? One way to do that might be with Cat. I swear the second I said he didn't really have much of a ceiling, he had 47 fantasy points last game, so that was hilarious. But that was his best game in 5 games. And he only had 1 other game in the playoffs that even approached 50 fantasy points. So we do know he has a ceiling. We know he's a talented player. I like his utility price at 9.2K. I think he's a fairly easy guy to get back up to, assuming you're not captaining Luka and Edwards probably. But I think I probably prefer him in the captain slot if I'm going to play him, just because I think he's going to be at most the 3rd highest owned captain here, and possibly a lot less. And he's got I think the 3rd best projection on the entire slate. He sure does. So that makes him appealing. Right now he's going to be very owned across the board because there's only 9.2 in utility. But if we feel like he's going to be low owned in captain, that's pretty appealing. My favorite captain play, though, is going to be Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert at 8K is going to be very friendly to everybody in the utility spot. He's coming in at 63% ownership, which is matching Cat. I have no problem with rostering Cat and Rudy together, but I think it makes a lot of sense as far as correlation goes to play one or the other, just because it's not that often where multiple superstars go off in the same game. They can both play well, but it's pretty unlikely that like Luka is going to score 40 real points and Kyrie is also going to score 40 real points. It just doesn't tend to happen that way. It can. I don't want to paint you in a corner here, Jaden McDaniels style, but I just think I would pick one or the other personally. But Rudy and captain is very, very interesting. He's going to be owned for sure in utility across the board. But if you get him at low owned captain at his current price, I think that opens things up and gives us a little bit more wiggle room. Right away, if I go slide in Gobert at 12K captain, let's see, he is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 most expensive captain. So we're saving some money for a guy who I think his projection is a little bit low. Like I don't believe that's where he's going to be at. He's at 35 fantasy points projection for this slate. He was right around there at 34.9 per game across 4 meetings with Dallas, but this is not like a really difficult spot for him. I think he can take advantage of Gafford and Lively down low for sure. So he should be cleaning up the glass. He can block some shots, and obviously he can get some easy buckets. So I like Rudy Gobert a lot. Big reason for that is he has a really nice established floor. And this is a matchup upgrade for sure. He doesn't have to deal with Jokic anymore. But he's had 30 plus fantasy points in each of his last 4 games. So even when he hasn't been getting there, he's been like still producing. So we know he has a ceiling too. So if he can get it going, Rudy, unowned Rudy at captain slot is very, very appealing to me. And if you slide him in there and then just say you want to eat the chalk with Jaden Hardy, all of a sudden you got a ton of money left. You can go get Luka, you can go get Ant, and then you have 5.7 over your last 2 plays. Go get Naz Reid in there. Or maybe we can drop down and go get Josh Green, who I like, and then you can go up and get PJ Washington. There's a lot of different ways you can go, but I think Rudy Gobert is a really rock-solid captain play. And the only reason I wouldn't want to do it is if I find out Rudy Gobert in captain is going to be really, really chalky. Mike Conley, not super interested in Mike Conley for captain. He's certainly going to go Drew Holiday level and just nuke everything and make me look stupid now because that's how it goes. But the guy just does not have a massive ceiling. He's really there for his defensive facilitation. He's not a high-usage guy. Not really an explosive scorer in general. That doesn't mean he can't do that. We've seen him do that before. He can do it, but just on average, he doesn't have the ceiling and the usage that we want out of somebody who's going to be, in the captain, or we're expecting him to do a lot. So at 24% ownership and utility, I think that's fine. I think if you land on Mike McConley, his utility price is 7.2. No problem with that. Worth noting, he's questionable again. And since this is game 1 at home, Minnesota could feel comfortable enough like they could get this game without him, and then that could end up giving us supreme value elsewhere. So keep an eye on that. If he plays, he's just an okay play. I don't have a problem with him. And if you want to just test the DFS gods and see if they'll spurn me again with Drew Holiday syndrome, slide him into your captain to see what happens. You never know. I would only do that, though, if you're rolling out a lot of lineups. Okay, same with like the PJ Washington and some of the other stuff I've been saying where you're kind of deviating from the more for the safer plays with more upside. So that's how I'd approach that. Of course, you got Jaden McDaniels. If you want to test it and see if Jaden McDaniels can do it again out of the captain slot, I have no problem with that. Just based off of minutes alone, he's been crushing in his last 2 games, 35 and 39 fantasy points. If he's not in foul trouble, he is going to, he's going to play a ton of minutes. I mean, he's shooting out of his mind right now. He's made 15 of his last 20 shots, so he's shooting like 75%. It's ridiculous. That's not sustainable. So I don't really want McDaniels in the captain slot personally. And utility is fine because he's not even that owned at 25%, and he has a good price. I'm okay with utility, not super interested in captain. I said going into the 2-game slate that without knowing ownership projections yet, that I would have kind of leaned McDaniels. When I'm looking at McDaniels and Naz Reid, I would just lean who's going to be less owned. Right now, that actually projects to be McDaniels. So while McDaniels, what he's doing isn't sustainable, he is the better ownership play for sure when compared to Naz Reid because he gets more minutes, he projects better, and he's not going to be as owned. That said, Naz Reid's chalky because he's just a bit more reliable. He's coming in with the optimal 50% of the time. He has 41% ownership, and his projection is not that far below McDaniels. And the nice thing is he's considerably cheaper than McDaniels. So you're saving 1.4K. So I really don't have any issue eating that chalk. And Naz Reid does have a ceiling. So if you want to slide him into captain, I think you can do that. but it's not like he's really exhibited a lot in the playoffs. He only has one game over 30 fantasy points in the playoffs. So if his second game doing that is tonight and he gets 30 or 35 fantasy points, I think that could do it. That could be enough. If Luka and Edwards don't go absolutely crazy, then sure. That's the other thing. Whoever you're sliding captain, you do still need, most likely, you need those other guys that hit, and you probably need them to not hit like at a supreme level. And if everything goes your way, then it can work. And then Nickeil Alexander-Walker is probably the only other guy I'm looking at here. Don't have a lot of interest in him unless Mike Conley misses. If Mike Conley's out, he is a smash play. He would be viable in the captain, and he would be almost a must for me in the utility. There's also Kyle Anderson, but honestly, him and Na just aren't getting the minutes or the usage at the moment, so I don't really trust them. All right, that does it for me. Hopefully this breakdown helps you a little bit. You can apply it to the 2-game slate as well. And best of luck to you that way. Hopefully this helps you. If it does, please give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching and good luck.